All right, guys, let's go through chapter 4, Safe Food Handler. All right, personal hygiene and contamination. How food handlers can contaminate food. When they have a foodborne illness, that's a big one. When they have wounds or boils that contain a pathogen that is not properly covered, right, with a bandage and a glove. Sneezing or coughing, contact with a person who is ill, failure to wash their hands, that's probably the biggest one, and if they have symptoms of a foodborne illness. There's a couple things for sure that you need to know in this chapter for the test. Jaundice, you'll hear that a couple times, right? And that's a big one. And jaundice is an indication of hepatitis A. And that's yellowing of the eyes and or the skin. Let's see, Staphylococcus aureus, right? So otherwise known as staph, is a everybody typically has staph in their nose and their like nasal passages, and they carry staph, and it does not harm you. Your staph in your nose does not harm you. However, that staph bacteria will harm other people. So really, anytime you touch your nose or sneeze or any of that, you can potentially be contaminating your hands or fingers with staph. So you got to be really careful when it comes to touching your face and your eyes, your nose, that kind of stuff. Let's see. This scenario shows how easily this can be, how easily food can be contaminated. All right, so let's think about this for a second. When you and when I give this, we'll talk about this in class in a live setting, right, where we're all sitting around, and knowing that I'm getting ready to talk about this, and I'll watch, and you'll see how many people touch their face while we're sitting in class, right? Somebody just scratches their nose, or they flip their hair back, or they rub their neck or something. And always 2-3 people in the class always do something. I usually do too. Now that when I start talking about it, like I subconsciously now itch my beard or something like that. And any other time, right, if you're not working in a food service environment, any other time you touch your face like that, it's not really a big deal, right? So you're driving in your car and you flip your hair or whatever, and who cares, right? Not a big deal. So the majority of your day or your time or your life, right, it's not that important that you pay attention to what you just touched and whether or not you got to do anything about it. So now all of a sudden we're asking you to, within these 5, 6, 7, 8 hours or whatever you're working during your shift, now all of a sudden it's a big deal and it's important. So it's hard to create that habit at the beginning because you're not used to having to do it any other time. And honestly, unless you really pay attention to if you're touching your face or not, you won't really realize you're doing it. So you have to really be conscious of what you're touching, and especially when it comes to your face or your head, your body parts. Disease is not transmitted through food. That is typically one of the biggest things that happen with, as far as like hygiene is concerned, is transmitting diseases not through food. So, for instance, that's hepatitis, HIV, tuberculosis, that kind of stuff. The biggest one is hepatitis A, and I think that's coming up more later in this chapter. So, a good personal hygiene program. Creating personal hygiene policies, training food handlers on those policies, and retraining them regularly. So usually that's one of the very first things you guys will learn in the food service business, right? In your very first job working in the kitchen, you get taught, or should be taught, how to properly wash your hands, because it's so important. And that's a basic 101 rule and training that you would receive, how to properly wash your hands. Honestly, too, in the kitchen, you can't wash your hands enough. Modeling the correct behavior at all times. Supervising food safety practices at all times, revising personal hygiene policies where laws or signs change. So you have to make sure, you have to watch the people, make sure they're washing their hands, make sure they're washing their hands correctly. I mean, that's probably the single easiest thing you can do to help prevent foodborne illness, is properly washing your hands and washing them enough. Let's see. Never wash your, always got to wash your hands in a hand sink, not anything, not anywhere else. Let's see. Next page. There you go. How to wash your hands. Number 1, wet the hands and arms. 2, apply soap. Make sure there's enough for lather for buildup. Scrub hands and arms vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds. You may have heard before too, just sing happy birthday to yourself twice. That's where that would come from. And rinse hands, arms thoroughly, right, using warm water. And use a single-use paper towel or hand dryer to wash your hands. It's always single-use paper towel or hand dryer. And the step that is not really included in here, which typically needs to be, is to turn the water off with that same paper towel. The one thing that you will, I know has been on a test in the past, is right here. The whole process should take at least 20 seconds. Ding, ding, ding. Make sure you know that. That will be most likely on your test. I've seen that question before on tests several times. It'll ask you, you need to know the steps in order. And the 10 to 15 seconds is typically what everybody memorizes, and they make sure they know that, but everybody forgets, or they don't see this one little sentence up here that says the whole process should take 20 seconds. So yes, know the 1 through 5 and know them in which order. But also make sure that you know that it takes 20, the whole process should take 20 seconds. Next page. When to wash hands. Food handlers must wash their hands before preparing food or working with clean equipment or utensils. Must also wash their hands before putting on single-use gloves. Food handlers must wash their hands after the following activities. Any of the things that you'll see on the test, as far as, like questioning when you should wash your hands, are all pretty much common sense items, right? Coughing, sneezing, smoking, handling soiled items, right? Handling raw food. That's all pretty self-explanatory. One thing that I can tell you about too, from a cross-contamination standpoint, is you see that picture on the top left, where the employee is grabbing that handle. And it might be a door handle, it might be a cooler handle, it might be the handle on the oven. Those are things that you want to make sure stay clean, because that's a great opportunity for cross-contamination. A lot of times people they'll be busy, their hands will be, kind of sloppy, they got something on them, and they go into the cooler because they're in a hurry, and they touch the handle, and they get some of that schmeg on the handle, and there it sits, right? So, and the next person goes in there, and they grab the handle to open the door, and now they got it. So, door handles, oven handles, that kind of stuff, you want to make sure that those things get wiped down and cleaned regularly throughout the shift. Next page, taking out the garbage, right? So here's all the list of stuff that, you would want to wash your hands after, which again is pretty self-explanatory and pretty much common sense. Corrective action. If you do see food handlers who are not following proper hand washing procedures, correct the situation immediately. If they have touched food or a food contact surface with unclean hands, you have to do something about it. You can't just yell at them and tell them what they should have done. But now you have to actually do something with the food or the utensil or whatever that they contaminated. Hand antiseptics, also called hand sanitizers. Biggest thing here is that you cannot replace hand washing with hand sanitizing. So just because you can't go, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to go grab some of the sanitizer and I'm good. Nope, you have to wash your hands first, then use the sanitizer, right? So right here, big red letters, right? Never use it in place of it. So always make sure that may come up too, is that you have to wash your hands before and then sanitize them, not just sanitize them. Next page, fingernails. The rule from the health department has kind of changed lately on fingernails, false fingernails anyway. It used to be right here, this sentence here. However, false fingernails can be worn if the food handler wears single-use gloves. That used to be not true. It used to be you couldn't have false fingernails at all. Period. Now it says you can, but you got to wear gloves when you're doing them. Honestly, in a food service environment, there's no place for false fingernails. The type of work that we do, from a speed standpoint and being able to have good dexterity, and being able to have good knife skills, it's not conducive to good work practice to have fake fingernails in a food service environment, period. I mean, it's just there's too much opportunity for stuff to get underneath them or for them to pop off. It's just kind of gross, in my opinion. So the rule, though, according to ServSafe and is you can have them if you wear gloves. Nail polish, though, you can too, but you have to wear gloves. So again, those are both new. Used to be you couldn't wear nail polish, you couldn't have false fingernails, period. So again, if you are going to have those things, then you got to wear gloves, period. Infected wounds or boils, that's kind of gross, right? So obviously, you want to make sure that somebody has that's covered correctly with the bandage. Next page, bare contact with ready-to-eat food. That is typically where essentially this page is saying that. So you see the guy above here, right, where he's working with some raw food and does not have a glove on. Because he's working with raw food and that food is going to get cooked or have some temperature, right, through a cooking applied to it, it's considered okay that he does not wear gloves, unless he's working with high-risk population. And below, what this says is bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food, right? So bare hands means no glove, right? And ready-to-eat foods means stuff like this picture at the bottom, right? That food's not going to get cooked. It's not going to see any kind of heat. So if there is anything on it, it's not going to get the opportunity to be killed off because it's not going to get cooked. So that's what's considered ready-to-eat food. So anytime you're dealing with ready-to-eat food, you have to wear gloves, period. Can't use gloves instead of hand washing. That's a big one, right? You still got to wash your hands. Let's see. Buying gloves. Yep, there are different kinds of gloves. There's latex, there's vinyl, there's those real cheapy thin plastic ones. There's a couple different kinds of gloves. The biggest thing you want to do, if you are responsible for the operation or you're in charge, or if you're not and your employer does not have the multiple size gloves, then you should ask for them. Having to use gloves in a kitchen is not fun. You lose a little bit of your sense of touch, and you could potentially lose some dexterity, right, with your knife skills and whatnot. If you have a glove that is too big for your hand, That's the worst thing. You see people put on a glove, and they should be wearing like a medium, and they have a large, and the fingertips are all hanging out, and they're way too long, and that's just silly. That's just asking for the tip of your finger, the glove of your finger, to get cut off and get into the food, and you wouldn't even know it, right? Because that's just asking for trouble. And again, you don't have the dexterity you want to have in your hands when you're dealing with a knife. Or anything really for that matter, if the gloves don't fit you well. So they should be good and snug and tight on your fingers. Some people have latex, are allergic to latex, so sometimes you may have to get a vinyl glove for them, even though everybody else uses latex. How to use them? Wash your hands before putting on your gloves and before starting a new task. Period. Now, if you think about that for a minute, from a cross-contamination standpoint, right? You have to touch the gloves to grab them out of the box. And the part of the glove that you are touching to grab them out of the box is the outside of the glove. So when you put it on, whatever you had on your hands prior to touching that glove is now on the outside of the glove. So that's why you have to make sure that you wash your hands before you put on the glove. Let's see. Don't blow into them, right? That's a big one. Never wash and reuse gloves, obviously, right? Change them. They're not expensive, and you should change your gloves many times. When to change them, right? As soon as the gloves become dirty or torn, before beginning a different task, after an interruption such as taking a phone call, after handling raw items, right? Or after 4 hours of continuous use. So I know that the 4 hours of continuous use has been a question on the test before. And you may say, okay, well, why is that, right? What is that? First of all, if you're doing the same thing for 4 hours, that's gonna kind of be rough. The other thing is you would probably have to take a break or stop or something within a 4 hour period of time. However, the reason that the 4 hours is the time is significant, and you'll know why this 4 hours is mentioned in this when we get to that section in the textbook. The times it talks about time and temperature. But there is that 4 hour, after 4 hours of continuous use, remember that sentence, because that is, may, most likely come up, on the test. Other good personal hygiene practices: personal cleanliness, correct work attire. Honestly, if you are an employee who doesn't, care about, what you look like and whether or not you have good personal hygiene or your uniform is clean. If you're an employer, right, that says something about the person. And honestly, if you're an employer, you're responsible for hiring people, you hopefully don't have to have this conversation with anybody ever, because you're hiring somebody who cares enough to care about their appearance, right? I mean, come on, really? They're gonna, who comes in and working in a nasty, dirty uniform? I mean, that's just gross. And again, just says something about the person, let alone the fact that it provides the opportunity for foodborne illness through transmission of dirty clothes. All right, hair restraints. Let's see. Typically, it's hats and or hair nets. False eyelashes can be a physical contaminant if they fall off. Some places will make you wear a beard restraint. I don't think that the health department, requires that. Some places make you wear it, some places don't. Kind of depends on the operation. Clean clothing, obviously. Aprons are a big one, right? First of all, you always take off your apron if you're leaving the line. If you're going to go to the bathroom or take out the garbage or something like that, always take off your apron. And your apron should always be clean too. You may want to have more than one. or have maybe like a plastic apron or something you could put over yours if you know you're going to do something that's particularly messy. That would probably be a good idea. Jewelry. Essentially the only thing that you are allowed to wear, is a plain wedding band or a plain band ring. And typically that's a wedding band, but just plain band, that's it. There is no bracelets, no watches. You can't wear, right? So right here, food handlers cannot wear any of the following: bracelets, including medical bracelets. There's a trick question, and there are several trick questions on the test, but this is a trick question, and it lists some kind of specific medical bracelet. The person has a heart condition or something, and they wearing that bracelet, and is that okay or not? And I think that's a trick question, because you're going, oh my gosh, right? This person has a heart condition, or whatever. It's important that we know that. So yeah, it must be okay that they wear that, right? Because it's they got a heart condition. No, the answer is no, they cannot wear it. So remember that you cannot wear medical bracelets. The only thing you're allowed to wear on your hands or arms is a plain band ring, period. If you read this paragraph down below, other facial, earrings, that kind of stuff is usually company policy that says whether you can or cannot. But as far as your hands are concerned, your arms and hands, only thing you can wear, plain band ring. Medical bracelets are not allowed to be worn. Next page: eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum, or tobacco. Pretty much because you have hand-to-mouth contact when you're doing those things. That's essentially why you can't do those things. The drinks in the kitchen almost always has to have a lid, and has to be kept away from the food. The reason you want to have a lid on your beverage is really twofold, right? One, you don't want any of that beverage to slosh out on anything, food contact surface area, or the food itself, or whatever. And the other reason is you don't want anything falling or getting into your drink. So always has a lid. Usually the establishment, the restaurant you're working for, will have somewhere specific that you are supposed to keep your beverages. So that would be something you would want to find out. Reporting health issues. That's a big one. Usually that is something that is addressed during like an orientation. Is that, hey, you know what, employee, right? If you don't feel well, or there's something off, you need to tell us so that we can do something about it. Especially now with the COVID stuff going on, it's a very big deal that if you are an employee and you come into work and you do not report that you have symptoms that are COVID related, you can potentially, and there are places where you could potentially get fired because you didn't tell anybody. A lot of places now are making the employees sign off, answering the 5 questions. Have you been around anybody who's had it? Do you have any of the symptoms? Do you have a fever? Those things that an employee has to check and say, no, I don't have any of that, before they're allowed to come to work. And if they lie on that report, then they could potentially lose their job. So reporting health issues, especially now with COVID going on, is pretty important. You go reporting illness. Staff must also tell you when they've been diagnosed with an illness from one of these pathogens, right? And these are, if you remember these, right? What are these? These are some of the big 6 that you have to know. And that's because these are the most common types of foodborne illness, and the potential for an employee to maybe have one of these if they have these symptoms is there. So they have to let you know if they have it or not. Okay, here's a big one. This is definitely going to be on the test, and you want to know this for sure. Um, so, restricting or excluding staff for medical conditions. All right. So, if the food handler has an infected wound or a boil that is not properly covered, right? You can do two things. You can restrict or exclude, right? So now it depends on what we're looking at on this chart is here's the situation, right? Over here in the orange on the left. And then on the right tells you what you should do about it, right? So they have an infected wound that is not properly covered, right? Restrict. So you would say, okay, well, I would just exclude anybody who has any of this and just to be safe, right? Well, you can't do that. Because you're going to need that person to work, right? If they're scheduled and they're supposed to be there and they're supposed to work, and you can't send everybody home all the time or you don't have anybody working. So depending on, the point of this is depending on what's wrong with them, you may not have to send them home. You may be able to have them just do something else, right? So that's what restrict means. So restrict means they would not, right there, restrict the food handler from working in with exposed food. So, okay, I can have this person work doing something else, right? Maybe they're just cleaning that day, or they're just bussing tables. They're not touching anything that's going to go out to a guest. So that was kind of the logic behind why you can have them work, but what that means is, okay, well, they can't work around exposed food, utensils, and other equipment. Food handler has a sore throat with a fever. Restrict, right? So there's two different, now they have a sore throat with a fever. So is that a potential symptom of foodborne illness? Yeah, maybe. Right? So restrict the food handler from working around food, utensils, and equipment. So maybe now that person is your hostess, right? They're not really working with any food, utensils, or equipment. Where you would exclude them, right, is if they're working with a high-risk population. And that really is the two things. So there's this is kind of confusing. I'm trying to put these into categories for you. So let's look over here again. Food handler has an infected wound, is not properly covered. Yes, they can still work as long as they're not working around any food, right? So they can restrict is the answer, right? Food handler has a sore throat with a fever. Okay, well, that depends. If they're working with a high-risk population, which is what? Do you remember what high-risk population is? There's three of them. Old people, young people, and people with medical conditions that are like there are treatment for cancer, that kind of stuff. So those are the three things. So where would you potentially work with high risk populations, right? A daycare, you have young children. You might work for a nursing home where you have old people, or you might work in a hospital where you have people that could potentially be on medication that suppresses their immune system. So if you had a sore throat with a fever and you worked in one of those environments, or you worked with high risk population, then you be excluded, which means you do not come to work. But if you have that same symptom and you're not working in a high risk population, then restrict is the answer. So yes, they can work, but they can't work around food. The food handler is persistent sneezing, coughing, runny nose that can cause discharge from eyes, mouth, or nose. Restrict, right? And that's just as long as they're not working around any food or equipment. Now, why is that? So this person up here has a sore throat, and then we say, wait a minute, they can't work around high risk. This person has these symptoms, and they can work. Well, why is that? Because if you remember previously in this chapter, these symptoms are not symptoms of a foodborne illness. Now, they may have a cold, right? And they may be symptoms of a cold, but it's not necessarily symptoms of a foodborne illness, where sore throat and a fever is. And that's listed specifically as a symptom of potential foodborne illness. which is earlier in the chapter. So you want to make sure that you know that sore throat with a fever, that's the verbiage. That part of that sentence is what you will see in the test. So if you see sore throat with a fever, right, exclude with high risk, restrict with not high risk. So just remember that, because that will be on the test. Down here, right, food handler has at least one of these symptoms from an infectious condition, right? Jaundice, vomiting, diarrhea. You see any of that, right? That boom, you automatically exclude. There is nothing. It doesn't matter high risk or not high risk. If they have any of those, then they do not come to work. Food handlers must meet one of these requirements before they can return to work. Have had no symptoms for 24 hours or have a written release from the doctor. So that's a big one. So if you can remember that, you'll be good to go. Remember that any of the symptoms that are related to a foodborne illness is either restrict or exclude depending on where they work, where the person works, right? And if they have any other kind of symptoms that aren't related to foodborne illness, it's okay to either restrict but not exclude. And the only one is automatically exclude only is those particular symptoms listed right here. Food handler, is vomiting from diarrhea, has diagnosed with an illness caused by one of these pathogens. So essentially they have a foodborne illness and they've been diagnosed with it. Okay, well, duh, that one is also excluded. So there is no safe opportunity for that person to work or be anywhere near your restaurant if they already for sure have a foodborne illness. So that one would also be exclude. Exclude. All right, chapter summary. Once again, do your questions and stuff at the end of the test. Best practice. Try to answer them on your own. If you get it wrong, go back and find out why you got it wrong. And then discussion. That's what I want to talk about when we have our live meeting. Is any questions you guys have on this stuff? Why, you know what the answer is because it's in the back of the book, or because I told you during a lecture. But if you don't understand why, and you want some more explanation on any of this stuff, on any of these things that we're talking about up to now in chapter 4, that's the opportunity for us to discuss those things live and for me to be able to answer any questions you guys have. So that's it for chapter 4. Chapter 5 will be next.